This is going to be your ultimate guide for Pokemon Showdown Generation 3 OU. If you're watching on YouTube, there will be chapters below the video so you can skip to whichever parts are relevant for you. In Pokemon, there are different generations of Pokemon. Generation 3 includes the first 386 Pokemon. There are currently 8 generations of Pokemon. We're only focused on the first 3. Overused limits which Pokemon you're actually able to use from that pool of 386 Pokemon. You cannot use any Pokemon that is considered an Uber Pokemon, which basically means it's super overpowered. For example, Pokemon such as Deoxys, Ho-Oh, Latios, Mew, Rayquaza. There are also a couple other Pokemon that are not considered Uber that are just banned for other reasons. Maybe their ability is too powerful or they have too powerful of stats or something like that. But for the most part, those are the majority of Pokemon that are actually banned in this format. There are a few clauses such as the Sleep Clause, Species Clause, Evasion, One-Hit KO. Pokemon Showdown is an online Pokemon battle simulator. It actually looks something like this. This is my team builder. This is the homepage. We could actually just spectate a game if we want to, just to show you what it looks like, but this is what the interface actually looks like. This is what Pokemon Showdown looks like. This is your active Pokemon. This is your opponent's Pokemon. When you're playing in a battle, it'll actually show you what moves you have available down here. And this is the history of what went on during the battle over the course of turns. Smogon is a very helpful website that gives you a ton of resources related to Pokemon Showdown. You can do underused, rarely used, never used Ubers, everything you could want to learn. A lot of it is on Smogon, which is basically the academy for Pokemon. Just a few things about the clauses again. Only one Pokemon on an enemy team can be put asleep at once. I believe this doesn't count if you put yourself to sleep. So if you put yourself to sleep via rest or something to recover HP, your opponent can still put another one of your Pokemon to sleep. Species clause, a player cannot have 2 species of the same Pokemon on their team. So you couldn't just have a team of 6 Dugtrios or 6 Gengars. And that goes for different evolutions, I believe, as well. So you cannot have like Charizard and Charmeleon. I doubt you'd even want to have Charizard and Charmeleon on your team, but you just can't. The evasion clause, you cannot use any sort of evasive moves, things such as double team or minimize. Pokemon Showdown discourages RNG as much as possible. Obviously, Pokemon inherently has some amount of RNG because of criticals and stuff, but they want to mitigate the amount of RNG. You also can't use one-hit KO moves for the same reason, such as like Horn Drill, Guillotine, Sheer Cold Fissure. The Baton Pass clause means that you can only have one form of stat boosting alongside Baton Pass across the whole team. And then the only ability that's banned is Sandveil. Sandveil says if Sandstorm is active, the accuracy of moves used against Pokemon is multiplied by 0.08, which is really busted. Especially because Sandstorm is a very popular mechanic in this meta because the most popular Pokemon, which is Tyranitar automatically summons a Sandstorm when it comes into play. So if a Pokemon has this effect, it basically just reduces the accuracy of all moves trying to hit them for free. And again, Pokemon Showdown doesn't really encourage things that try to reduce accuracy. Next section, which Pokemon are playable? I'm going to include, by the way, a bunch of links down below this video. If you guys want additional helpful resources, there is hours and hours of Pokemon Gen 3 OU content that you can digest at your leisure. So all these Pokemon, Aerodactyl, Blissey, Breloom, Celebi, all the way down to Moltres, Salamence, Skarmory, Tyranitar, Zapdos. Every Pokemon on this list is considered OU, which means they're overused. They're the most popular Pokemon at this ranking. That doesn't mean that Pokemon that are lower than OU are not viable. In fact, some Pokemon that are like underused, you will still see sometimes played, such as Articuno, Alakazam you will see. Hariyama is a Pokemon that you will see. You might see some of the Regis being played. Dragonite you will see occasionally. Blaziken and Camerupt you will see occasionally. Sceptile, Rhydon, Rhydon D's nuts. Let's just dive right into what the top Pokemon in the format are. Rankings for the top Pokemon in Gen 3 OU. If you want to see what the current tiers are, based on whether you're watching this video, maybe you're watching it a year from now, but this list is constantly updated with the ranking of the Pokemon in Pokemon Showdown. So this was last updated about 4 months ago, and things should, for the most part, be pretty similar. What's great about this list, you can actually click on a Pokemon and get an enormous amount of information about the overview of this Pokemon, what role it has on the team, the different builds you can use with each Pokemon, the moves you can give it, the strategy behind it, which Pokemon it synergizes with, which Pokemon doesn't have synergize with, what teams it's useful on, the different sets you can use. Look at all this information about just Tyranitar. There's entire pages about literally independent sets. So let's actually get right into Tyranitar. Tyranitar is actually always rated S tier on pretty much everyone's tier list. A couple reasons why Tyranitar is rated S tier is one, it has 600 combined base stats, which is incredibly powerful. Tyranitar just has really, really crazy stats. The typing is very good, rock and dark. It's bulky and it can also pack a punch. It also has a really, really good diversity of different builds. As you can see by the depth of stuff on this page, you can build fast Dragon Dance Tyranitar. You could build Pursuit Tyranitar. You could build bulky Tyranitar. You could build physical attacker Tyranitar. You could build mixed Tyranitar. You can do Choice Band Tyranitar. There's even other options. Those are like the main ones, but there's all these other ones, and you can just mix it up and build so many different types of it. And by types, I mean you can assign it different moves. You can play it with different EVs to boost different stats of it, different natures, and it'll give it a different play style based on how you put the EVs into it and which moves you give it. But what really sets Tyranitar above the other A tier Pokemon, and what really puts it from A to S tier, is its ability Sandstream. Sandstream means basically when you switch this Pokemon in, it summons a Sandstorm. When you swap Tyranitar in, it indefinitely summons a Sandstorm, which will basically chip away at a Pokemon's HP at the end of every single turn, unless that Pokemon is a rock type, or I think a steel type. I think rock, steel, and maybe ground are immune to Sandstorm. So actually Pokemon that are immune to Sandstorm have a little bit of extra viability rather than Pokemon that aren't immune to Sandstorm. So Tyranitar itself is immune to the Sandstorm, and the Sandstorm will chip away. I think it's like 1/16 of the Pokemon's health each turn. So it negates things such as leftovers. It reduces the effectiveness of stall strategies where Pokemon can't naturally organically survive as long when they're taking a slight bit of HP per turn. It also doesn't really take into account of resistances or anything, so it'll always chunk for a 16th regardless of typing immunities and anything like that. No matter how bulky the Pokemon is, it'll always chunk for a 16th. It's not a set amount of damage, just a set percentage of damage. Luckily in this generation they didn't give the rock types a special defense boost in Sandstorm, which is in future generations. Tyranitar has a super flexible move set. You can build it in so many different ways. If you want to learn more about Tyranitar, you can read this guide in full detail to learn more about it, but it's definitely the most popular Pokemon in the meta, and it's a defining Pokemon of Gen 3 OU. The only other Pokemon in Gen 3 OU that sometimes people will rank S tier are Metagross and or Skarmory, which most people will rank at kind of like an A+ sort of tier, both extremely strong Pokemon. Metagross also has fantastic stats and a really good typing. Steel typing, similar to actually Skarmory, who's also steel typing, grants your Pokemon a lot of natural resistances. It also just has access to some really good moves. Meteor Mash with Metagross is just absolutely insane. It's a really, really strong stab move that just crushes Pokemon and has a small chance to raise your attack. So that's usually one of like your best attacks, and it can also have a ton of other stuff. A lot of times when your Metagross gets to low HP, some of them have Explosion. Earthquake is pretty good. You can give it a psychic type stab move, and then you can give it all sorts of other things. You can build like so many different sets with Metagross: bulky attacker, mixed attacker. Mixed basically means it's a mix of special and physical attacks that Metagross will use. So for example, psychic is a special attack, hidden power fire is a physical attack, meteor mash is a physical attack, explosion is a physical attack. So this is a mixed Metagross. In Gen 3, there is no physical special split among the moves. For example, all moves that are psychic type are all special moves. Any move that is normal is a physical move. All steel moves are physical, which matters because some Pokemon have different stats for their defense versus their special defense. Metagross is a better bulky Pokemon against physical attackers because it has very high defense, whereas its special defense, while still impressive, is not as high as its physical defense. You can do a lot of cool stuff with Metagross. You can give it things such as Shadow Ball to fight against like a lot of the psychic type Pokemon, Alakazam, Gengar, Dusclops. You can give it Dynamic Punch to fight against Blissey, Earthquake, as we saw here, Rock Slide, Hidden Power Bug to beat Celebi. You can give this thing so much stuff. It's a very strong Pokemon, and again, you can read more about it here. Tyranitar is a good counter to a lot of other Pokemon in the format because of its typing, and it has good, and you can just build it in ways to counter different Pokemon. You can give it like Brick Break, you can give it Rock Slide, you can give it Dynamic Punch, Aerial Ace, Crunch, you can give it Fire Blast to beat things like Scissor or Fortress. Aerial Ace can beat like Breloom. You can just give it such a versatility of moves so you can use it as a flex slot to kind of counter whichever Pokemon that maybe you want, that you need to fill in a gap to counter. So that's why a lot of Pokemon like Tyranitar and Metagross are really good, because they have access to a lot of these moves that you can build them in so many different ways. They're bulky, they hit hard, and they can cover the gaps on your team sometimes if your team doesn't have a counter for a certain Pokemon. People love Skarmory, and it obviously makes sense. Skarmory is an amazing Pokemon. Skarmory is great because of its typing, of course. Steel Flying. Again, Steel has a ton of resistances. It's a very good defensive Pokemon. You can see its very high defense stat. Stands out as the best Spikes user and one of the best physical walls. Its move pool makes it a strong pick for teams that appreciate extra residual damage you can inflict with Spikes and Toxic, which is usually a big part of its move pool. Spikes are very good just the same way they are in Gen 4 OU. You place spikes in the ground and then they will accrue incremental damage over the course of the game as you're switching in and switching out Pokemon. What Spikes does is it places a layer of spikes. You can put up to 3. Anytime a Pokemon switches in that's not a flying type or a Pokemon with Levitate, it will get damaged by spikes. Opponents will lose an H of their HP with 1 layer, a 6 with 2 layers, and a quarter with. So you can imagine Pokemon is a game all about giving yourself tactical advantages by switching at the optimal times into different Pokemon, and switching is a big part of Pokemon Showdown, constantly switching between counters or pivoting to threats that you want to have in play. And when you put spikes in, it makes it a lot harder for your Pokemon to pivot between Pokemon. So spikes users are very valuable in this format. It has things like Toxic that can also chip away at opponents' Pokemon HP. So Skarmory will do something like place a layer of spikes, Toxic your Pokemon, and then like just start protect, like it'll protect for a turn so Toxic can chip away a little bit about it. Then it will Whirlwind or Roar your Pokemon out to switch into a new Pokemon, which will take damage from the spikes. Then it will protect again. It'll just like it'll kind of cheese you. It's like it'll kind of like stall out and just chip you for incremental damage. Leftovers is good when you're using Protect, so you'll just like stall turns with Protect and Whirlwind, and you'll just like constantly recover life with Leftovers. Possibly one of the best leads in the game too. We'll talk about leads and stuff in a little bit. It can learn really good moves. You can build it in different ways. You can build it with stuff like Hidden Power Ground. You can build Taunt Skarmory. It doesn't have as flexible of move pools as stuff like Metagross or Tyranitar, but it can learn some moves that make it flexible enough where you have a couple different options for builds. You have standard Skarmory, you have offensive Spike Skarmory, and then you have some other like less common options. Zapdos, awesome Pokemon. I also just personally love electric type Pokemon, but electric is a really good typing in this. It's a really good counter to a lot of the water type Pokemon. Flying means it's a really good counter to a lot of like grass type Pokemon and stuff. It's a good switch in against a lot of Pokemon, and typically Zapdos I think is more of a special attacker. I would say usually one of the stronger special attackers in the game. Basically what Zapdos just wants to do is come in, play Thunderbolt, and just have a really strong stab electric move. It's the most versatile threat in ADVOU. Its special attack is off the charts and supported by a good speed tier, so it's also faster than a lot of other Pokemon in the format. This is a typical standard offensive move pool. The ability Pressure basically means your Pokemon use double power points for all their moves. Usually you have a coverage move such as Hidden Power Grass or Ice. If they bring in something to counter you, you have ways to deal with that as well. Thunder Wave Toxic, usually it has one status inflicting move and then some sort of either stall or chip damage move or move to switch Pokemon out. Something like this is how you typically build Zapdos. You typically will want something like Hidden Power Grass because Zapdos doesn't actually do damage to Swampert because Swampert is a ground type, or something like Marowak, or I don't know, something like that. You can see with like agility and Baton Pass, Zapdos can also support powerful teams or act as a late game cleaner. Its decent attack stack also allows it to be a mixed wall breaker. You can also make it a defensive tank, being the only specially bulky spikes immune Pokemon. When like a spike lead such as Skarmory and Zapdos comes in, Zapdos doesn't need to worry about taking damage from spike. So Zapdos is a nice counter for Skarmory too, because Skarmory is weak to electric. It just counters a lot of really annoying things in the meta. Swampert is a really ubiquitous Pokemon. Great stats. It's a water ground type, so it only has one weakness, which is grass. which basically means that your team always needs to have someone that knows a grass type move, or it's really hard to take down Swampert. It says it's the premiered answer to some of the tier's most fearsome physical attackers. Swampert's the Leviathan of ADVOU, because basically Swampert is good against a lot of those top Pokemon. So Metagross is weak to ground, Tyranitar is weak to water, and then Aerodactyl, and water is good against rock. By the way, if you ever hear the term ADVOU instead of Gen 3 OU, it means the same exact thing. RSE being like Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald. ADV meaning like ADV short for advanced, short for Game Boy Advance, because the Game Boy Advance generation is when they came out with Gen 3. I call it Gen 3 OU. It really should be Pokemon ADVOU is what most people call it. So Swampert's really good for all the reasons I just mentioned. It has coverage with Ice Beam, so it can also counter things like Salamence and Flygon. Salamence and Flygon are dragon types. Ice is good against dragon. Usually its kit looks something like this: Earthquake, Ice Beam, Protect, and Hydro Pump. Protect is always really nice with leftovers. Any Pokemon that has leftovers can oftentimes benefit from Protect. You can build it as a defensive Pokemon. You can build it at Surf Defense, standard offensive with a substitute type strategy with like Salac Berry. Yeah, you can do all sorts of crazy things with Swampert. Swampert's a really popular Pokemon in ADVOU. Let's keep it going. Gengar, I think, is the most popular ghost type Pokemon. It's a really, really strong special attacker. It's a centralizing threat with versatility, high special attack, and speed that are very integral to its offensive role. You usually build this as an offensive Pokemon. I don't even know if you can really build this. I guess you can build this as a defensive Pokemon. Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, Explosion, Thunderbolt, Ice Punch. It would be a mistake to assume that it's a glass cannon based on its 4 defensive stat. In fact, it has immunities to normal. Yes, this is important. So because Gengar has Levitate, it actually has 3 immunities, which is awesome. So it's a good pivot in certain situations because it has immunities to fighting, ground, and normal. So it's a great pivot Pokemon. It has an abundance of opportunities to pivot, on mixed and physical variations of Salamence, Heracross, Snorlax, Swampert. So it's a great pivot because it has so many immunities. And it gets the opportunity to pivot in on Toxic, which is also important because poison types cannot be poisoned. Gengar is a poison type. So it can pivot in on normal moves, fighting moves, ghost moves, and specifically Toxic. I think that adds a lot of value to Gengar. It also has very few weaknesses that aren't widely distributed. I think it's weak to Dark, Ghost, and Psychic. Very, very strong. Can pack a crazy punch with its special attack, especially against Pokemon with weak special defenses. Pretty cool. You can build it offensively or defensively. Oh, and because it has Levitate, it's also immune to spikes. Similar to Skarmory. Skarmory's flying, it's immune to spikes. Zapdos immune to spikes. These ones are fun. Oh, Blissey is, oof. You can see by the stats that Blissey is insanely cracked as a defensive option for your team. Specifically, a special defense wall because of her crazy special defense. Not as good of a regular defender, but as a special defender, she will just dominate any special attacking Pokemon. You can see these are some of the things you can do with it. Soft Boiled's a healing move. Ice Beam counter. There's so many different ways you can build this Pokemon. Seismic Toss counter. Because Blissey's normal, it can pretty much learn any move you'd want it to. So you can give it Thunderbolts if you want to beat Flyers. You can get Fire Blast if you want to beat Grass types. Like you can, or if you want to beat Steel types, you can give it. You can build so many different ways. You can do the Calm Mind build like I just mentioned. Once you Calm Mind once, it just can roast people with like Ice Beam, Flamethrower. You just nut bust all over them because you're so bulky, and then you Calm Mind once and you're just insanely powerful. Jirachi, very versatile also. Also a Calm Mind Pokemon. You'll notice all of its stats are 100. It has very good stats. It has 600 combined base stats. It's different from some other special attacks, some other Calm Mind sweepers because of what it says here is partially a Steel type. So Steel type again is very relevant because it gains a bunch of resistances. It's immune to sand as well as toxic. Steel types are immune to poison, and because it's Steel, it does not get hit by sand from Tyranitar's Sand Stream. It will still get hit by spikes because it doesn't have Levitate or anything, but also the real reason why Jirachi is insane is also because of Serene Grace. Serene Grace makes all status effects from moves have a double % chance to go off. This Pokemon's also nuts in Gen 4 OU. I think it might even be, it's probably similarly rated in Gen 4 OU. It's insanely strong in Gen 4. It's also nuts in this generation. You have stuff like Fire Punch that gives a 20% chance to burn. Ice Punch has a 20% chance to freeze. Thunderbolt has a 20% chance to paralyze. So you have a much greater chance of giving a status effect to your opponent. And it just basically goes Calm Mind and then just starts chucking special attacks. It enables it to take advantage of choice band users such as Salamence, Aerodactyl, and Tyranitar that are locked into their stab move more easily because it has a good amount of resistances. It has an array of coverage moves. You have a lot of different ways you can build it. You can build the Wish variation of it. So you can kind of stall with Protect, Wish. Body Slam has a 60% chance to paralyze your target, which is absolutely insane. So you go like toxic them, then you will wish, then you'll protect yourself so you can delay a turn so you can get the heal from the wish, and then you can like start fire punching them. Or you actually would only use one of these two because you only can inflict one status condition to a Pokemon, so you actually wouldn't use both. The only steel type that has a reliable recovery move. You can build Wish plus Calm Mind, substitute Calm Mind. Salamence, another really popular Pokemon, very defining Pokemon in this format. Dragon flying, you can see here it has good attack, and you can actually build mixed Salamence too. So you can build offense Salamence, or you can build mixed Salamence with special attack also. It also just has pretty good speed. Like it just has fine speed, which is kind of nice. You can choice band Salamence. Yeah, Salamence has Intimidate, which is just insane. So Intimidate automatically grants you a move basically on swapping it in. So immediately when you swap it in, you get a free Growl. Intimidate is just one of the best abilities in the game. You can give it Leftovers, you can give it Choice Band. It can learn these moves. It can learn Hidden Power Flying. You can learn Earthquake, Iron Tail, Dragon Dance. You can do Resto Chesto stuff, Fire Blast. You could give it Charcoal for Charcoal Fire Blast. This is mixed Salamence. Here's Choice Band Salamence, what I was just saying, Hidden Power Flying, Earthquake. You can do Dragon Dance Salamence. It's a great matchup against Toxic Spikes and Sandstorm. Spikes do not affect Salamence. It's good against these types of cores, I guess, basically probably because of the moves it has. It's good against Blissey because it could be a physical attacker against Blissey. Against Skarmory, you can have stuff like Fire Blast. Tyranitar, you can use Earthquake. What do we have for Swampert? Oh, you have Hidden Power Grass. Yeah, it's good against a lot of the really other popular Pokemon. Becomes one of the strongest wall breakers. One of the most effective ways to prevent Baton Pass Celebi from passing Calm Mind or Swords Dance, which is a team strategy in this format. Some of these Pokemon, I have a couple quick things to say. So these are a lot. We're going to go through all these very fast. Just want to show you some other Pokemon that you will see often that are also good. Basically, for the Pokemon I just showed you, it's important to have an answer for every single one of those Pokemon on your team if you want to have like a viable team. So your team always wants to have answers for stuff like Tyranitar, Skarmory, Swampert. Those are like all important Pokemon to just try to have answers to. You'll never have an answer for every single Pokemon, but if you can have an answer for as many of those as possible, your team's going to be a lot more viable. Thank you guys so much for making it halfway into this video. If you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, if you learned something, please consider subscribing on YouTube. We also have a Discord if you want other people who play Pokemon Showdown, and want to play with other people. It's a lot of fun in there. And if you want to play 1v1 against me, I will be doing 1v1s occasionally over on our Twitch channel. Links to everything will be down below the video. And with that, thank you so much. Let's get back to the action. Celebi is great. It's also a legendary. It has similar stats to Jirachi, has good typing. Grass is really good against all the water types out there, such as Swampert and stuff. It can be good against all these other Pokemon. You can pivot safely into Zapdos. It can pivot safely into Jolteon, same reason. Magneton, any electric type Pokemon you can safely pivot into because you resist it. It's a good counter to Swampert. Oh, it has Leech Seed. Once you plant Leech Seed, you get to steal an eighth of the target's HP every single turn. So Leech Seed is a really strong move. You can stall with stuff like after Leech Seed, you can use like Recover. You can play a build with Reflect to make it so it can tank better, or substitute. Claydol is a good spinner, which means it can get rid of spikes very easily. Spinners have the move Spin, a Rapid Spin, which gets rid of hazards such as spikes. Starmie is also a spinner, which we'll look at in a second. It is Ground Psychic. These are relevant typings. It even says here, Claydol is a godsend for many teams. It's also immune to sand. It's a good defensive typing to raise its profile as a spinner. It also just has good defense and special defense. It's a very bulky Pokemon. Despite Starmie's higher speed and its ability to pressure Skarmory, Claydol also packs a rock resistance and a ground immunity that allows it to pivot into common attacks such as Rock Slide and Earthquake. Because it has Levitate, it's immune to ground type moves. And it has a rock resistance. So this can pivot potentially better. You can build Claydol kind of as a mixed attacker. You can play with Stab Earthquake, Stab Psychic. Stab meaning it gets the same type attack bonus. So because it's a ground type, it'll do 50% more damage. And then you can also even give Claydol Explosion, which is nice. So this is like a very stock Claydol build. The spin is important to get rid of spikes. You get one stab move for each of its types, and then you get Explosion for when it's close to death, you can explode. You could also play something like Refresh to get rid of status effects. Suicune, water type, even though it looks like an ice type, which is very unusual. Suicune's viability is very good because it's a bulky water type that is a Calm Mind special attacker and defender. It is different than other water types such as Melodic or Swampert. Defensively, Suicune's defenses outstrip Melodic's and Swampert, giving it the heft to shrug off physically heavy hits. So it has much better defenses than these other water types. And surprise special attacks from the tier's primary threats, so it also can launch very aggressive special attacks against these Pokemon, which traditionally usually have slightly better physical defense. because this is a special attacker, it's sometimes a little bit even better against stuff like Tyranitar, Salamence, and Metagross, which Melodic and Swampert are also good against because they're water types, but this Suicune could be even stronger because of its bulk and because it can hit in a different way with special attack stat. It's a unique mix-up. If you don't want to play with like Melodic or Swampert, you can play Suicune. Also has pressure. Dugtrio is an awesome Pokemon. Ground is an amazing type. It hoses electric types like Jolteon and stuff, and like Magneton, except it can't hose Zapdos because Zapdos is flying. And it's super, super good because of its ability Arena Trap, which prevents Pokemon that are fighting against it from switching out. So once you switch it in against a Pokemon it's really good against, that Pokemon cannot escape. It's just basically doomed to get like Stab Earthquaked, which is just insane. It also has some other unique toolboxy stuff you can play. You can use Hidden Power Bug, Aerial Ace, Rock Slide, Beat Up, Sunny Day. You can do a lot of different things. Very good trapper Pokemon. Every team has a trap target, such as a physically bulky Pokemon. Calm Mind user, special walls, fighting types, bulky setup tanks, and even other trappers. So it's good to have something with Arena Trap to trap a Pokemon that you just maybe can't deal with otherwise, that Diglett can take out. Diglett is a little bit weak. You know, its defensive stats are nothing crazy, but the great thing about Diglett is it has good attack. It's gonna always stab Earthquake someone, and its speed is insane. So it can outspeed most things in the format, which is really nice. Yeah, see, its high speed also makes it a great revenge killer against many offensive Pokemon, such as Endeavor, Swampert, and Starmie. Its biggest weakness is its frailty. If it fails to KO the trap target, it's likely to be one-hit KO'd in return. Exactly. So it's a really weak Pokemon, but it's a really good trapper Pokemon. Aerodactyl is really good. Rock Flying is a great typing. It's immune to ground. It's immune to spikes. It's also immune to the sand from Sandstorm. It is one of the most feared Choice Band users, which restricts it again to one move, but it makes that move 1.5 times more powerful. So Aerodactyl Rock Slide is insane. It can make you flinch a lot of the time. It has really good power. It's stab. You can do Double Edge. Choice Band Double Edge is nice. Choice Band Earthquake is nice, and then or a Choice Band with a hidden power is really nice. One of the most dangerous late game sweepers in OU. Rock Slide is Aerodactyl's main stab move. It's got really good attack and really good speed. I think it is the fastest Pokemon in the format outside of Jolteon. Starmie also arguably the top spinner in the game other than Claydol. Very good, has rapid spin, gets rid of spikes. It's a water psychic type. Water's good against a lot of the top threats. It's also very fast too. It's 115 speed. The only common threats that can outspeed it are Aerodactyl, Jolteon, and Dugtrio. So it's fast. It can come in, it can like swap in and kill and revenge kill something. It's very good on TSS teams as a spinner and late game cleaner. Recover, Natural Cure. Yeah, it is a really good kit. I mean, it can learn both water and ice moves, which covers so much stuff. It can learn Hydro Pump and Ice Beam just the same way that like Suicune can or Swampert can. It also has Thunderbolt, so really good. And then it usually has Rapid Spin. Hydro Pump's a must-have despite its unreliability because it can one-hit KO Claydol, one-hit KO Tyranitar. Hydro Pump, even though it misses a lot of time, it's like the only really reliable good water move that is really strong. And then finally Snorlax. We'll end off with Snorlax. Very, very bulky. You can see its HP and its special defense. It's a good special defense bulker. Great defensive and offensive presence thanks to its curse set. So what you basically will do with Snorlax is it's a tank. You can use curse when it comes into play, lose a little bit of speed, but get attack and defense. So it can also be a good defender once you raise its defense with curse. It hits hard and it tanks hard once you curse. It has rest, so you can recover health. It can stall, it has leftovers, and then you just give it some crazy powerful attacks such as Return, which has about 100 power, and because it's stab, it's really good. You can give it Earthquake, Shadow Ball, Body Slam, whatever you want, Hidden Power Bug or Steel. You can give it a lot of really good moves. Those are the Pokemon, the top Pokemon. Without clicking on the individual pages, a lot of these other Pokemon are really, really good. Magneton is a premium electric type Pokemon. Breloom is a really good grass type Pokemon. Flareon's another useful dragon type. A lot of these are really good. Fortress is a good Pokemon. It's a spinner, it's bulky. Gyarados Gyarados is Gyarados, it's good. These are good fire type Pokemon. Moltres and Charizard are really good fire types that you'll see a lot in the metagame. Heracross, Jolteon is an insanely fast electric type Pokemon. Melodic's another water type option. Cloyster. You can build entire teams around some of these Pokemon too, like Smeargle, Hariyama. Venusaur is fine. Venusaur is actually an underused Pokemon, but you'll see it's actually ranked C tier. Venusaur is actually ranked above some overused Pokemon, which is kind of crazy because it's just a good Pokemon. A lot of these Pokemon aren't very good. The ones that are all in E tier, like Arcanine, Sceptile, Wailord, Solrock. I've seen videos of people ranking Marowak really, really high because Bonemerang is really good against Pokemon that you substitute. So you basically have this stab move that always hits twice, and the first hit will break the substitute. Before we look at some specific teams, I just want to highlight the different roles that Pokemon will typically play on certain teams. And there are some Pokemon that can play multiple roles, some Pokemon that usually play certain roles, some Pokemon that are built around Pokemon. One of the most important roles you have in a team is called a lead. The lead Pokemon is the Pokemon that you send out first at the beginning of the battle. A lot of times the Pokemon that's a lead Pokemon is a spike user. It could be a Pokemon that has just a really good setup move, or a Pokemon that sometimes it's an explosion Pokemon, like a self-destruct to like counter their opponent's Pokemon lead. Some good leads can be things such as Metagross, Salamence, Zapdos, Tyranitar, stuff like that, Skarmory. A lot of the Pokemon that are rated the top of the ranking list are typically all very good leads, like Metagross, Skarmory, Zapdos, like they're all just happen to be good leads as well. Typically, you don't want to lead with Pokemon that are good pivots or good counters or good tanks, like Pokemon that are meant to counter a certain other Pokemon. So something like Blissey wouldn't be like the best lead, or like Jirachi, or more of like your trapper Pokemon like Dugtrio you wouldn't want to lead with. Aerodactyl is kind of like a sweeper Pokemon for the end. You don't as often want to lead with that. Tyranitar could be a good one because it sets up Sandstream early. Then there are walls. So walls would be something such as Blissey, Celebi, Fortress, Melodic, Porygon, anything that's kind of like tanky. Even Skarmory or Swampert can be like a wall. Anything that you build as like a defensive tank, usually you save that for when it matches up well against a particular one of your opponent's Pokemon. And there's also Pokemon that are wall breakers, Pokemon that are designed to take down certain physically bulky, special defense bulky, regular defense bulky Pokemon. So wall breakers could be like Charizard, mixed Metagross, mixed Dragonite. A lot of times you want a mixed attacker as a wall breaker because it can use special or physical defense. Usually a lot of times walls are only good against one type. So like Blissey is more better against as like a special defense wall. And there's other ones that are better like physical defense walls. Jirachi can also be a wall breaker. Gengar can be a wall breaker. Spinners are going to clear spikes because there's another type of Pokemon called spike stackers, right? So like Skarmory is a spike stacker, Cacturne, Cloyster, Fortress, those are all spikers. Sometimes you lead with those Pokemon. Sometimes that's like your second Pokemon you switch in. And the spinners are Pokemon that will counter spikes. Starmie, Fortress, Donphin, Claydol. Those are all Pokemon with the move Rapid Spin to remove spikes from the play. And it's important to fit a spinner on your team if you can afford to fit one on your team. That's pretty much the basics of roles on teams. What I do want to take a look at is some types and samples of teams that we're going to look at right here. These teams that have mostly made their way into the books of history books of ADV, they are teams that represent ADV's major archetypes and are roughly placed in descending order in terms of prevalence of archetype and ease of use. This is actually a pretty recent post made about a year ago. July 17th, 2021. I'll put this team dump in the link as a link below the video so you guys can reference it. These are kind of stock teams that are popular in the metagame. You'll notice they're broken down into categories. I'll tell you what these categories mean. The first one is Balanced Toxic Sandstorm Spike, which is abbreviated into TTS. Toxic Sandstorm and Spikes are three kind of defining terms that you will use in Pokemon that are resistant or can get rid of those are sometimes more valuable. Balanced TTS, balanced meaning a balance of physical and special attackers. Skarmory is a spike user. Blissey is a toxic user. Tyranitar is the Sandstream user on this team. And then you have a couple other supporting Pokemon. And then you have your spinner, which is Starmie. You have your special attacker, which is Gengar. So you have just a pretty all-around well-balanced. Blissey is also your bulky member of your team, and you can see actually everyone on this team has leftovers. So these are a lot of balanced teams and some Pokemon you'll commonly see. Magneton, Aerodactyl, Moltres, Fortress, Salamence, Tyranitar is on all these teams. Swampert's very popular. Skarmory is very popular. Offensive TTS spikes offense. So offensive Toxic Sandstorm spikes and spikes offense, and more offensively built. And then you have defensive TTS, which is more defensively built. So you have like Celebi, which is a bit tankier, Skarmory, Fortress, Blissey, right? You have a Trapper on all these teams, Dugtrio on every team here, and defensive TTS, which is useful in taking down a Pokemon that it can easily trap. Spinner Balance, a mix of physical and special attackers, and it always will have a spinner on their team. Mixed Offense, so a mixed offense between special attack and physical attack. These teams will hit hard. This team is literally called Blue Offense because every Pokemon on this team is blue. Maybe I can like zoom in on this a little bit more so you guys can see it a little better. So these are very aggressively oriented teams. They're not as much focused on, they're never focused on stalling. Special offense is more so focused on special attacking. So Zapdos, special attacker with Thunderbolt. Starmie, special attacker. Spikes offensive. Again, another offensive team, but playing heavy on the spikes. Yeah, this team kind of revolves around Smeargle quite a bit. And then Calm Mind, Bat and Pass. The idea of these teams is you play a bunch of special attackers that use Calm Mind, and then you bat and pass it to another party. So since Celebi is a really bulky Pokemon, Celebi will use Calm Mind, and then we'll be able to bat and pass it onto another Pokemon that can hit really, really hard. Jirachi, for example, or into Suicune, or into Porygon, which is another Pokemon that has like really good specials. And this whole team is very special attack oriented. Dugtrio in this team is really good as a trapper because it can take out something that's like maybe too physically bulky for your rest of your team, or that has too high of a special defense for the rest of the team to deal with, right? So like Blissey, physical offense, another physically aggressive type team. These types of teams are less common. Magdoll spikeless bulky setup does not focus on spikes at all. So there's no spike user on this team. This is a bulkier team. So you have a spinner, you have Celebi, which is really bulky, Snorlax, which is bulky. You have Suicune, which is kind of your counter for the big main Pokemon. It's your water type. Salamence is really good. And then Swords Dance Bat and Pass is similar to Calm Mind Bat and Pass, except Swords Dance Bat and Pass focuses more on physical attackers rather than special attackers. In this case, Celebi would use Sword Dance 1 or 2 times, and then it would pass Swords Dance onto Tyranitar or Metagross or Gyarados, and then that Pokemon would just have a really beefed attack and crush people. Like you could pass it on to Aerodactyl, and then Aerodactyl could roast people because it's just so much faster than most other Pokemon on the format. So that's what the teams look like. All these teams that you just saw, I uploaded them here. Last link I wanted to go over, which I'll also include in the description below the video, ADV OU team building strategy, archetype core as a data-driven approach. This has a ton of information in it. If you're interested in building your own teams in Pokemon Showdown ADV OU, I would recommend taking a look at this article. So this article will kind of give you an idea of what you should be considering when building a team. Your lead analysis, your cores for your team, and what Pokemon synergize or dis-synergize with each other. So for example, you can see here there's a lead analysis for what they consider are some of the best leads in the format. Tyranitar, Skarmory, Salamence, Zapdos, Metagross. And then information on what makes them a good lead and why you might want to pick them and where they're useful. Then it goes into detail about the different cores on a team. This is actually an archetype. This is not a core analysis, this is an archetype analysis. So the archetype will kind of tell you what Pokemon fit into a certain archetype and synergize with that archetype, and what you'd want to consider when making a certain type of team, or if you want to build around a certain Pokemon, what Pokemon work well with it. So if you want to build around like Melodic or Heracross or Flygon or Porygon, which Pokemon will help you build around that better. This will teach you about the Melodic Celebi stall strategy, which is a fun if you want to build a stall team. And there's so much information here. If you want to build Magneton Offensive, an archetype of physical offense where playstyles involve wall breaking with Magneton and soft checking the mid-game with 4 on the team, using fast cleaners in the end game. Skarmory Bliss Toxic Sandstorm Spikes, TSS, usually has Skarmory and Blissey on it. And then it's a team reliant on toxic spikes and stands. So you usually have Tyranitar, Skarmory, and Blissey as like the core of this team, and then you use other Pokemon to support that strategy. And it even says here, just about every team built in Advanced OU must know you're going to overcome this archetype. This is a really strong archetype, the Tyranitar, Skarmory, Blissey archetype. Spikeless mixed offense. Usually have a lot of heavy hitters on this type of team. Porygon 2 based team. Porygon 2, which is a team you could build with the bat and pass strategy, right? With a lot of special attackers, or bat and pass with physical attack. You could do bat and pass with physical attackers. Pursuit Tyranitar. This is the core for that, with like Fortress or Aerodactyl. This is an interesting pick. Do not traditionally play Pursuit Tyranitar as an archetype, but it fits on several archetypes. The program is suggested accompanying Mons, yada yada. Okay. Special Spikes Offensive. So if you want to play a special attacking team with spikes. Dugtrio Stall. This is a balance between physical and special attackers. It involves setting spikes and trapping ground threats and possibly weather reset at opportune moments, after which the opponent cannot overcome the healing loops. Spinner, Mag Balance, Bulky Offense, and then those are the 9 it talks about in this article. So you can do a lot more of your own research, and then here is the core analysis. So this is what I was talking about before, with cores, they do a full analysis of what cores synergize really well with each other. Like for example, Celebi Claydol Metagross is a core, Celebi Claydol Magneton. And you go down here, like Gyarados Salamence Steelix is a core. These are like different cores you may want to include on your team that are synergistic with each other, and they cover each other's. Cores are important because they cover each other's weaknesses. So the most basic example you can think of in Pokemon, Fire, Water, Grass is a core that would cover each other's weaknesses, so to speak. You actually probably see that combination somewhere. Like this is a Grass, Electric, Water. Like in the newer generations, once Fairy type was released, a good core is Steel, Fairy, Dragon. Yeah, this is this is so much information in it. So this is a great article. I'm gonna plug this and all these other links in the video I'm gonna make. Last few things before we end the video. So once you've kind of digested a lot of information about the format, you wanna start playing and building your own teams. Just remember that first of all, you wanna have fun when you're playing Pokemon competitive Gen 3 OU. When you build your own teams, you wanna think about which Pokemon or strategy you wanna build around instead of assembling a team of the best Pokemon. It's kind of like if you're building a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't just wanna put all the best cards into your deck. It's not going to work and synergize well. You want to think about your machine the Pokemon altogether, the team that you build is greater than the sum of its parts. So when your Pokemon work in tandem with each other, that's when your team is going to actually shine. So when you're building your team, you typically want to think about either what Pokemon you're going to want to build around or what strategy or archetype you're going to build around. It's going to give you a lot stronger of a team. You can just put the 6 best Pokemon on your team if you want to, but it just might not work out as the way you want it to. When you build a team, you have cores on your team, right? So you have Pokemon that cancel out each other's weaknesses. You want both physical and special attackers, usually at least one of each. You can have more of a focus on one or the other, but you always want at least one, or at least something that can counter certain types of tanks or certain types of threats that specials can't counter, that physicals can't counter. So you usually always want to have at least one special and or one physical attacker. You also need to have answers for all the top Pokemon. Tyranitar, Skarmory, Blissey, Gengar, Swampert. Like if you don't have counters for at least like those Pokemon, you're gonna have a lot more difficult time because those Pokemon are super popular in the format, like Zapdos, Dugtrio, Starmie, Aerodactyl, Moltres. You want to have enough answers for as many Pokemon as possible. Your team will just be stronger, and it'll just be able to answer more things, and it'll work out more. I have other Pokemon Showdown guides for other formats if you want to check them out. There will be some videos that'll pop up on the screen right here. Go check out those videos if you want to go learn more about other Pokemon formats. Good luck with your Pokemon Showdown games. I hope you learned something and got something out of the video. Take care, everyone.